Hello and welcome back everybody to the Foodbuild factory, where today we're going to take a look at the Ronin, a build I'm very happy to finally present to you because I have been waiting for quite some time to show this off. And yeah, let's get right into it. So what this character is going to be about, pretty straightforward, is we are going to use a combat knife with faster swing speed, using the newly edited katana skin that was part of the recent scoreboard. And yeah, we're going to play as a gladiator build, but in addition to that, I finally got hands on Thorn armor. Shoutouts to Minerva at this point. For those of you who don't know, which probably isn't anyone, but I want to mention it either way. The Thorn armor is a armor piece, or armor set, sorry, that was added quite a while back when there were world raids, which was kind of a endgame content that was scrapped soon after it was introduced, and nowadays it is a reward that you can buy for gold bullion. And yeah, Minerva finally had it. Last time she had it to offer, I didn't really have the bullion, and pretty much Thorn armor is the endgame solution to melee in order to make it a bit more viable. And with a bit more viable, I mean a lot more viable, depending on your build. So what this armor set does is it basically gives you bleeding damage. To be more precise, you do 50 points of bleed damage with every hit you do. And the good thing about it, compared to let's say the Stranglerheart power armor, is firstly, bleed damage is not counteracted by any resistances of enemies, which instantly makes it more potent, because other than acid and poison damage and all that stuff, it doesn't get reduced to basically nothing by enemies' armor. And in addition to that, it can still stack, and that's pretty much the most important thing here, meaning that for every single hit you do on an enemy, you do get 50 bleed damage, no matter what, as far as I know. And yeah, that's a nice thing, especially if you have something fast swinging. And guess what? The combat knife is already pretty fast swinging, and in addition with yeah, obviously with martial artist and the swing speed mutation, swing speed legendary effect, yeah, you can get quite some hits in on enemies. Now, another thing to consider here is that the serrated blade for the combat knife does come with its own additional bleeding damage, which should stack with the one we are using here from the Thorn armor, but that's kind of negligible for the simple reason that, yeah, it doesn't really show a value when you modify it, but it's not too much bleeding damage, to be honest. I played this character for quite a few days without the Thorn armor, just in order to prepare it, because I already knew Thorn armor was coming and I wanted to make this build. And yeah, playing with it without Thorn armor, yeah, the bleeding damage was not really a factor I considered when fighting. But yeah, I just wanted to mention it either way. Mostly the interesting part about Thorn armor is that, yeah, it's pretty powerful, so to a degree that you can actually use stuff like drills and rippers to finally, some extent at least, make them somewhat viable. And yeah, there's even videos out where people like Oxy and so on kill endgame bosses like Earl Williams with the paddle ball and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really one of my favorite rewards, if you can call it that, in the whole game. It's pretty much perfect in my opinion when it comes to being a rewarding set of armor or something. It has some pretty hefty grind to it, nothing compared to back when the world raids were out, but yeah, it still is nothing you just get within a week or so. You really have to work for it, but once you do, it really is very rewarding, super satisfying to use. And especially what I like about it is that it basically balances out itself in power level, just by the fact that, yeah, melee weapons are so unequal to begin with. So melee isn't really bad, it's just not the best anymore, but usually if you want to go melee, your only option is to go with slugger weapons, because yeah, while you can get more swing speed out of something like the combat knife and so on, you can definitely do some pretty great DPS, but yeah, as soon as you're going against tougher stuff like Scorch Beast, which we hopefully can do in a short while, but it really depends on if this motherfucker will land. Yeah, while you can do some pretty decent work when it comes to mobs like here the Scorch and everything, yeah, once you go against tougher enemies, you're just going to get a sore index finger, to be honest. It's just a time thing, and it very much still is a time thing when you have the Thorn armor, but bleeding damage stacking up on fast swinging melee weapons just really adds up to your overall DPS. And by the way, I really fear that this guy has no intention to land anytime soon, so sadly I think we have to leave him, despite this... Has he landed? Despite this being a melee build that could do pretty quick work of him. But yeah, you're getting less benefit from the bleeding damage on slugger weapons that swing less fast. So yeah, it kind of balances itself out and makes fast swinging, otherwise lower damage melee weapons a way more viable. And okay, he finally landed, just as I decided to leave him alone. And here we can see, we can go for some power attacks for no other reason than we can. To be honest, there's not a big difference in DPS in my opinion between power attacks and standard attacks. Now we can see bleed damage doing its work there. It doesn't seem too impressive, but to be honest, it kind of is. And after playing with this build for a while, you really... Oh, okay, perfect. You really get a good idea of when you can leave enemies alone and just let bleed damage do the rest. Oftentimes it's still the better option to just go for another swing that otherwise wouldn't be necessary, just because it works faster. But yeah, you can oftentimes get away with 2 or 3 less swings than you would usually need, just because bleed damage will do its thing. And this is especially potent when it comes to, as I said, boss enemies, where you can really get the full extent of bleed damage, so over time your DPS will just go up and up, to a certain point obviously, but that's not the case. Sorry, that doesn't matter here. And another big thing is when you're doing fights with a bunch of ghouls, for example, any horde basically, because you can just furiously swing into any direction, and you will see enemies drop left, right and center after a few swings, just because you don't have to focus on them to really bring them down. So here, for example, we can see they're just dropping. This can obviously stack with stuff like bleed damage from the Talons mutation if you want to go for a melee for an unarmed build. And yeah, really the most interesting thing in my eyes is that you can actually use stuff like the Ripper and so on, but I do have a build in mind for that. And the first thing I wanted to show off here is this Ronin build, for the simple reason that I really like the aesthetic. And the katana is one of the coolest rewards so far in my eyes from the scoreboard, for one simple reason. I mean, a katana skin is cool to begin with, no discussion there in my opinion, but they did something I was really hoping they do, but I was kind of sure they would do after the dilemma that was the Alistair Swordskin. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, in the last season, I think it was the last season, there was this reward called the Alistair Swordskin. I think it was just that. Basically, it was this futuristic kind of one-handed sword that was a craftable skin for, as the description said, most one-handed melee weapons. And once I got that, I was kind of like disappointed, because most one-handed melee weapons was such a wrong description, because ultimately it wasn't possible to craft a skin for such an amount of weapons that would have made sense, like the Assaultron blade and so on. I think the only thing I can remember it using for initially was the Revolutionary Sword and the Chinese Officer Sword. And yeah, people were quick to complain about it, and Bethesda changed it, so now you can really use it for pretty much every single melee weapon, with the exception, one-handed melee weapon, with the exception of really clubs like the Sheep Squatch Club and so on, or stuff like the pipe wrench and so on, where it really wouldn't make a lot of sense. But ultimately the point I want to make here is that you can use it for small blades. Talking about switchblade, cultist blade, the cultist dagger, sorry, and the combat knife we are using here. And that makes it so we finally have a weapon that looks like a real sword, but is super fast swinging. So it really fits a katana in my opinion. The very fast swing speed here just makes you really look like a super swordsman or something like that. By the way, the reason I call this guy Ronin is just because from my limited understanding of Japanese culture, yeah, it's a lone samurai basically that has no master or something, and yeah, the hairstyle we're using is the Ronin style, and I think it was rather fitting. So please don't go too harsh on me if there's anything about this character that doesn't make sense as a Ronin. But yeah, I think it just gets the point across pretty good, and yeah, there's not really any limit to the character. So what Thorn Armor enabled me to do is to kind of not fully invest into only damage, but give me a lot of points that I could invest into defense as well, which is nice. And in addition to that, yeah, just the added damage output is great by this thing. And really, in terms of gameplay, it's super fun to use just because you have this massive katana that's so fast swinging. Yeah, it just really works together perfectly. And yeah, there's not really any limit to what the character can do, honestly. Ever since I had the Thorn Armor, I was doing pretty much everything from daily ops to killing Mylar Queens and everything. And yeah, when it comes to really tough enemies like sheep squatches and so on, it definitely still is a little bit of a time consumption thing, but not hard by any means. And definitely that's when you see a lot of improvement in time to kill compared to just the same build without Thorn Armor. Surprisingly, it's rather, once you have the plans, it's rather cheap to craft in my eyes, for the simple reason that you can't re-roll it or anything. It works like Secret Service armor that you can't re-roll, but with the added benefit that you only roll 3-star armor pieces, as far as I'm aware. At least from all the ones I have crafted, it's always been 3 stars. And yeah, you need ball steel, which is something you can buy from the purveyor for 10 scrap each. You need like 13, I think, for a max level armor piece, and in addition to that you need a module. But overall, yeah, you come up to like something like, yeah, 180 scripts per piece, which is relatively cheap. Compare that to any other one if you want to re-roll it with legendary modules and so on. Yeah, you need more than that. So once you do have the necessary plans, it's actually rather cheap to craft. But enough of the Thorn Armor. We all know it's relatively good. Well, not enough. One thing I wanted to say is it's not the best when it comes to resistances, but we tackled that by using other stuff like yeah, like perks like Ironclad and so on. So forgive me for that. I know a lot of people think they're not good, but I will explain once we're going to them. And yeah, in terms of visuals, I went with the Ranger armor. I think it works so perfectly for this character. I don't even know what it is, but yeah, I think it just looks very great with the katana and the black eye patch, and that's basically it in terms of visuals. I really like it. Parachute, backpack, just because. But yeah, one more swing and then the rest should be done with bleed damage. So let's just see here, let's just play with him a little bit. But yeah, there he dropped. Another thing about the Thorn Armor is that melee attackers do get poisoned as well. Sorry, do get bleeding damage as well. But that's not something I take into consideration too much, because honestly everything that's within melee range has bigger problems than his bite going back to him at that point. And it really is satisfying to just leave characters like that alone and let bleed damage do the rest here. We are pretty tanky, I gotta say. I really like that. It's not like a level of tankiness where we never use a Stimpack or anything, but still, I think that overall everything worked out pretty well. Now this guy decided to delete himself, rather luckily for us, so we have less work to do here. But yeah, it might seem like this playstyle gets a little bit dull just because you're mashing the hitting button all the time, but really it just feels so satisfying to use. I can't bring the whole point home enough. Like, yeah, it's just super fun and engaging, and really one of my favorite melee builds in quite a while. So yeah, pretty quick work here. Here we do have a turret. I'm sure we do have 2 or 3 more super mutants standing around, but ultimately, yeah, there wasn't a point where we had to sweat a little bit or anything. It's just going really well, everything. And yeah, I think we're done. I think that was all when it comes to gameplay. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the gameplay part of the video, and now we're going to take a look at the mutations and everything. So let's get into it, starting off with them. Here you can see it, Walled 94, Thorn Armor, Bleed Damage plus 50, as I said earlier. And yeah, in terms of mutations, you see we have quite a lot going on here. We do have Bird Bones, Carnivore, Chameleon, Grounded, Healing Factor, Marsupial, Scaly Skin, Speed Demon, Talons, and Twisted Muscles. So right off the bat, there are some unnecessary ones here. For example, Talons, Chameleon, and Bird Bones. Talons, we just don't get any benefit from it since we're not using unarmed weapons, but yeah, as it is similar to other mutations I will talk about in a second, removing the mutations and risking to remove other mutations which I have to replace was just a little bit too much of a hassle for the little bit of debuff that we get from them, so I decided to leave them in. Something I often do, but I will talk about it here. So yeah, when it comes to Talons, due to Class Freak, the only downside we have from it is -1 in agility, and I will talk about that in a second. Agility is actually not all that important to us, so keep that in mind. Talons is not necessary here. Would be nice if you use unarmed, obviously. Then we do have Chameleon. This one's completely useless because yeah, we do wear armor, so we don't get any effect from it whatsoever, in addition to not being a sneak build to begin with. But on the other side, it does have virtually no downside, so no reason to risk removing other mutations only to remove that one. And lastly, we do have Bird Bones. Now, extra agility is nice. It means we can use a little bit more power attacks, but what I wanted to say earlier is, for once on a melee build, I actually don't think power attacks are too important here, because after all, you really want to rely on getting a lot of hits in, as many as possible. And ultimately, I think you're better off just using standard attacks rather than power attacks. I do use power attacks every now and then just because I like how we swing our weapon. Here you can see it, and that's basically it. So you can definitely live without that extra for agility, and one more strength would mean a little bit more damage output, but to be honest, one less strength also isn't the world, so yeah, we could definitely live with the debuff. And yeah, now going over to the more important mutations, we do have Carnivore here, which is always a good decision when you go for a melee build, in my opinion, for the simple reason that something I have shown off in previous builds. Yeah, food buffs from meat are very good for melee builds. There's quite a variety of very good buffs that with Carnivore give you 20% extra melee damage, more strength, and so on, and they are very readily available. I have not used one during the video, just because yeah, on this occasion actually bleed damage does the most work, but still increasing your melee damage output still increases your damage output, obviously. So things you could definitely use: Yaogwai Roast, but talk about Mutant Hound Chops, they are very readily available and give you 20% extra melee damage, so that alone is more than, let's say, Bloody Mess, and you don't need anything for it other than the Carnivore mutation and a cooking stove. And yeah, there's a ton of them, just look them up, but I'm pretty sure you know all of them. And next on the list is Grounded. Now this one was a pretty obvious one on this occasion, just because we're not using energy gun damage and energy damage at all to any degree. We are just using ballistic damage from our katana, so negative to energy gun damage is absolutely no negative whatsoever to us, and 100 extra energy resistance is nice to have. It just makes us more tanky. Wouldn't be necessary, but as I said, virtually no downside to us. Then we do have Healing Factor, which is always hit or miss. Some people hit or miss. Some people don't like it because they like to rely on chems and stim packs and everything. But on this occasion, as I said, we are relatively tanky, and 13% less healing from stim packs is something we can definitely live with. Other than that, as I said, we are a melee build, so most of the good buffs come from meat and everything, which isn't affected by this debuff. So really the only thing you're missing out on is stuff like Fury or Psycho buff, but at no point did I think that was necessary. So yeah, health regen, natural health regen is really nice here because, yeah, as I always say, with healing factor, the nice thing is you just have to survive an encounter, and that's it. You don't have to think about, hey, if I just get out of this situation with 20% health, I have to waste like 2 stim packs or something to get back up to full health. Doesn't matter whatsoever. Just survive the encounter and that's it. You're back to full health in no time. And then we do have Marsupial. This is pretty straightforward. More jump height, a little bit more carry weight at the expense of a little bit less intelligence. Yeah, you don't want to live without Marsupial. That's it. The jump height alone sells it. Then we do have Scaly Skin, and this comes in to what I said earlier about this build, where action points actually aren't too important here. We don't really rely on power attacks at all, so having less action points is just not too much of a problem to us. Ultimately it means we can sprint a little bit less, but to be honest, 12 AP is basically nothing anyways, so yeah, we can definitely live with that and therefore get 50 extra resistances. This was kind of necessary because I touched upon that earlier. Yeah, Thorn Armor in and of itself doesn't give you the best resistances. Just from the top of my head, I could be wrong here, but I think we're talking about something like 230 damage and energy resistance on a full health set. Sorry, on a full set with max level armor, which isn't quite enough to make us really tanky. So 50 extra energy and damage resistance was very nice to have. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I don't have any of the modifications for the armor yet, so I'm pretty sure you can definitely get it up to something like maybe 280 or 300 damage and energy resistance, at which point you can definitely rely on your armor in terms of defense more, but still, Scaly Skin, as I said, has virtually no downside to this character, so I would always use it. Then we do have Speed Demon, and yeah, it's just here for the movement speed. It would be maybe a consideration to not use it if you go for something like a Overeater set, but even then, in the past, when I used Overeater's armor sets, I still used Speed Demon because I found that, yeah, keeping yourself well fed and hydrated is not a problem if you want to, and yeah, just the faster movement speed from Speed Demon is very nice here. Obviously, we don't make any use of the reload speed since we're not using any weapon that has to be reloaded, but yeah, just closing the distance between you and an enemy faster is nice, and also really fits with the character being very agile and very fast overall. And lastly, we do have Twisted Muscles. That's one of the most important and no-brainers to my in my eyes. Gun accuracy minus 12% is virtually not an issue yet again, just because we're not using any guns to begin with, and it's just straight up more melee damage and a chance to cripple. Now, the chance to cripple, I said that in the past, seems to be very low. I never found any melee weapon to be good enough at crippling enemies so that I would rely on it, but it's nice to have. But basically, the extra melee damage is what sells the point here. That being said, going over to our equipment, and here we do have it, an anti-armor swing speed combat knife. I said it in the past, anti-armor hardly is my favorite when it comes to melee weapons, but it's just solid still. It really has diminishing returns just due to the fact that we do have such a potent perk, Incisor, but still you do get a benefit. If I had to decide, I would actually like an Executioner swing speed version. I nowadays find Executioners to be the most efficient, or my favorite primary effect on fast swinging melee weapons. But I think the last two melee builds I had were with an Executioner swing speed weapon, so I thought, yeah, for once, since I already had this, an anti-armor swing speed knife would do the job relatively well. And to be honest, the important thing here was the swing speed, just because it synergizes so well with the bleeding damage. As I said, we also have bleeding damage from the serrated blade, you can see down there. Another option, if you want to go for stealth, would be the Stealth Blade, which gives you like 10 less damage or something like that. But yeah, gives you a little bit of extra sneak attack damage. But yeah, for now, the Serrated Blade definitely was the best option here. And obviously we do have the Samurai Sword skin. No, to be honest, I could have been wrong to begin with calling this thing a katana. I'm really no swords buff or anything, so correct me if I'm wrong. In my eyes, this is a katana, but I probably am not right on that. Anyways, yeah. That's the weapon. In terms of condition, by the way, yeah, that's a little bit of a problem if you not invest into it, just because you're hitting your enemies so often. But we do have two different perks that help us out with that and make it virtually a non-issue. This thing goes for ages with our setup, so that's something to keep in mind. And 106 damage doesn't seem too impressive, but keep in mind how fast we're swinging, and every time you hit an enemy, you can, on top of that, calculate 50 extra damage from our weapon. Also, yeah, the weight is pretty impressive with 0.44, but yeah, enough about the weapon. Let's talk about our armor set. And here I went with a full set of Mutants armor. We do have 2 pieces with a P refresh as far as I remember, and 3 pieces that have one of the elemental damage reflects as a third perk. But other than that, there's nothing too interesting here. Obviously, these 5% chance to deal so and so damage to melee attackers is nice and synergizes well with the effect of the armor itself, that melee attackers do bleed. But as I said earlier, yeah, enemies in melee range have bigger problems than that. Really the important part here is the AP refresh. I think we have 2 pieces with extra perception and so on, so virtually nothing too interesting here. As for Mutants, I went with that for the simple reason that, yet again, this is 50 extra damage and energy resistance across the board, which isn't too impressive, I'm gonna be honest here. But firstly, it works at all, basically at all levels of HP, so we're not depending on low health or high health as with Vanguards or bolstering. And 50 was enough on this occasion, so as you see down there, we are at 325 damage and 385 energy resistance, and that was an amount of resistance I was comfortable with, and that's also thanks to the Mutants effect. The Mutants effect does bring us into the realm of diminishing returns, which was ultimately what was important to me. AP refresh, 2 pieces, always nice, but yet again, not really necessary on this character, but still, it's nice to have. In terms of under armor, obviously we went with shielded Secret Service under armor for 4 extra strength and endurance, making us both more tanky and more strong to give us more damage, so that was a non-issue. And the rest here I did already cover. The backpack has the chemist modification, so I can carry my excessive amount of stimpaks with me that I never use, but yeah, other than that, that was it. And that means we're now going to take a look at our perks here. And obviously we do have 15 strength to begin with. It's further boosted with legendary strength, but we will come to that in a few minutes. So what I have here is 2 ranks of the gladiator perks, which do increase our damage with our weapon by 15% additively here. We do have rank 3 of blocker, rank 3 of incisor, and martial artist. So this shouldn't be too much of a astounding setup for a melee build. Martial artist and incisor are no-brainers. They should always be there. They are the most potent perks when it comes to melee weapons in my eyes, increasing our swing speed and our armor penetration, so very straightforward. And then the only thing that could maybe be different for others is I do have blocker. I wanted to have blocker here just because it's such a valuable defense perk, and in expense of that I did only use gladiator at rank 2, so some people would maybe rather max out gladiator and ditch blocker, which is definitely something you can do. It's not like enemies will maul you instantly, but especially fighting hordes of ghouls and so on, I found blocker to be too beneficial, or way more beneficial than having yet again 15% more additive damage. That's just not a lot. I can actually give you the precise number here, because yeah, in order to get away with that, I used Bloody Mess just because we could, and yeah, equipping and unequipping Bloody Mess, I found out that 15% of additive damage on this weapon here dilutes to 4 points of damage. It may be 5, I may be misremembering, but it's 4 or 5 points of damage, so I think I rather have 45% less damage from melee attackers than 5 more damage points. But yeah, that's it. Then we do go over to Perception, and just because I had a few perk points left here, I went with Glow Sight. Now, to be honest, the reason it's here is I usually had Agility maxed out with a little bit of a different setup there, and what I went with was was Adrenaline, but I just felt like the build was powerful enough to not use Adrenaline, which I always use, so I felt like I can get away with not using it on this occasion and put those perk points into Perception. Then we go over to Endurance, which is at 14, so pretty close to being maxed out. And here we do have Ghoulish, Adamantium Skeleton, Fireproof, and Ironclad. So Fireproof, pretty much a no-brainer, it's just always a good perk, I said it time and time again. Reducing the amount of explosion damage is 45% less damage from explosions and flames just doesn't really bring across the point how effective this perk is in my eyes. Then we do have Adamantium Skeleton. This is quite straightforward. Being crippled in a melee fight is just crippling, so yeah, you can move faster, slower. If your legs get crippled, you do get into that stagger animation, which can open up a situation for enemies to really continue to stagger you. I'm pretty sure, even I never really tested that breaking your arm can reduce your melee damage output and so on. So yeah, Adamantium Skeleton, and we don't get crippled at all. Ghoulish, this is a perk I often like to use, especially on melee builds, just because there's quite a few situations where this really helps you. For example, every time you fight near a fissure site, you do get constant small amounts of radiation damage, which will be healed off by a legendary perk, Ward Rats, that we do have active, but it also heals you, not for much other than using something like Toxic Goo or something, but it's a constant amount of little bits of healing, which really helps your survivability. And in addition to that, there are certain events, for example, talk about Radiation Rumble, where I found it really easy with this build to go for ore collecting, just because I put on a black hazmat suit and yeah, was collecting ore, and the amount of red damage you still get despite the hazmat suit makes you really tanky. So yeah, it's just a good perk overall in my eyes, and makes it basically, in combination with blocker, yeah, if you fight ghouls, for example, they become a non-issue. Like, there can't be enough to really swarm you in my eyes. And lastly, we do have Ironclad, which, yeah, this is a bit of a controversial one. A lot of people say it's just too much of a perk investment in order to be useful. 50 damage and energy resistance for 5 perk points is quite a little return for the investment, but on this occasion, yeah, it's not like we desperately need something else here. And yeah, as I said, I needed to go for a few steps just to get myself into the point of diminishing returns when it comes to armor rating. And trust me when I say there is a difference between using it with Ironclad and without Ironclad. I did both, and it really made a difference. Then we go over to Tenderizer. This is a pretty obvious pick. It's always a good option, but especially on fast firing or fast swinging weapons, just because 10% multiplicative damage boost after the first hit is nice, especially if you're always going to go for a second hit. And yeah, especially with this one here being a very fast attacking weapon. Not really because it's a fast attacking weapon, but I think you get the point. Yeah, it's a no-brainer in my eyes, so that's why it's here. Then we do have Intelligence at rank 5, Makeshift Warrior. Now, I mentioned this earlier when we were taking a look at the weapon. I said it. The combat knife has pretty solid condition usually, but the problem is, since we're attacking so fast and so often, we still wear down the weapon pretty fast, and Makeshift Warrior really helps us. This in and of itself would be enough, so I would say it's definitely a non-issue to use the weapon, but we go further than that, but we'll see that in a second. And then we do have Agility, which is at 12. We do have Action Boy here, Born Survivor at rank 1, White Knight at rank 3, and Dodgy at rank 3. So if you are a particular intelligent person, you probably made out that 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1 doesn't add up to 12. And that's because, yeah, as I just mentioned, up to like, would say 2 hours ago or so, I did play this build with adrenaline, maxed out agility and adrenaline, and yeah, I decided to remove adrenaline for the simple reason that I felt it wasn't necessary on this occasion, and I really still am convinced that it's the case. As you saw there, we didn't have any problem during the whole video here. Obviously, it's a little bit of a damage boost that you can definitely need, and if you want to, max out agility and do it. But yeah, I felt like I could live without it. And yeah, so we have 2 perk points here that aren't really utilized, but you could do quite a few things here. Now, one thing, yet again, a bit controversial, but you could actually use evasive for just, yet again, a few more points of damage and energy resistance. You could also max out Born Survivor, just if you have access to the stim packs. Yeah, you can make definite use out of it, but ultimately, I'm pretty sure you find something you can use here. If not, just use rank 2 of adrenaline, honestly. The thing is, I just didn't have the perk points to go for it. As you can see down there, we have no perk points left. So maybe, yeah, rank 2 of adrenaline would be a good pick, but ultimately, yeah. The rest here, dodgy. As I said, for once we're not really relying on action points too much. Usually when I go for melee builds, I do like to have a lot of action points in order to power attack constantly, which, yeah, as I said, due to the bleeding damage and the amount of hits we want to get in, power attacking just isn't too much of a thing here, and therefore I felt dodgy would give us a lot more survivability and would definitely be a good cause here. Then we do have White Knight. I pretty much always like to use it when, especially on a melee build, because you're just going to take a beating. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to happen, and yeah, repairing your armor is one of the most frustrating things in the game, for me at least. So yeah, White Knight is there, pretty straightforward. Then we do have Action Boy, and despite me saying that action points aren't too important here, good action point refresh is always nice. It also helps us with dodgy. We could live without it just because we do have 2 powered pieces, but to be honest, yeah, I wanted to have it either way. And then we do have rank 1 of Born Survivor. This is just a safety net I very often use. I do like it. It's 1 perk point. You can definitely use something else. You could ditch out this and go for rank 3 of evasive, but yeah, I just like to have it. If you are one person that always has an eye on your health bar and feel free and feel comfortable to just use stim packs when you need them, go for it. There's no reason why not, but to be honest, I just like to have Born Survivor here. It has saved my life in the past, definitely, and yeah, that's why I like it. And that being said, we're going over to luck, which is at 14. Pretty high for a character that doesn't use VATs, to be honest, but luck is just pretty good to begin with. Now, the obvious one here is Starch Genes. This just had to be here so we don't get any mutations we don't want and don't get rid of mutations we do want. So yeah, Starch Genes was kind of an important one. And similar to that, we do have Class Freak. Naturally, when you have so many mutations going on, Class Freak is always a good option. Now, as I said, pretty much every single debuff we do get, with the exception of Bird Bones, which decreases our strength by 4 without Class Freak. That would be quite crippling, but as I said, Bird Bones wouldn't be necessary to begin with. Anyways, Class Freak makes it so, yeah, we really don't have to worry about that. After all of these debuffs could add up a little bit and be an annoyance, let's say, so having Class Freak was kind of a no-brainer for me as well. Then we do have Ricochet, which it's not one of those builds that has a super nice synergy like using a Vampire's Weapon, which definitely would be a nice option on this build. Really would make you very tanky just due to the amount of hits you're getting in, and at that point Ricochet would be very nice because if it activates you also get a little bit of healing. But on this occasion it basically just is there to reduce the range damage we're getting by on average 18%, which is nice to have. So overall this is just here to give us a little bit more tankiness. Then, I mentioned this earlier, we do have Bloody Mess here. This is basically just because, yeah, we couldn't max out Gladiator, so we can do the exact same thing basically by using Bloody Mess here, and we did have the points left, so I went with it. After all, I said, it's not that big of a difference, but yeah, 4 damage, 5 damage, it's still a bit of a difference. And ultimately, even at least rank 1 I would like to have here, for the simple reason that, yeah, you do get the chance to make enemies explode every now and then, which just always is fun. And lastly, we do have Luck of the Draw. I mentioned this when I was talking about Makeshift Warrior, that, yeah, Makeshift Warrior alone would make it so you can definitely run this build without having to worry about repairing your weapon every 20 minutes, but Luck of the Draw really works very well with this character, just because you're attacking so often. You have a good chance to make it proc in every single fight, and it really helps on this occasion to keep your weapon in tip-top condition. So other than making it just convenient, I really went so deep into it on this occasion that, yeah, you really rarely have to repair your weapon. It's just something you don't really have to bother with. You can basically play for 2 weeks probably with this build without having to repair your weapon, which is just nice. But similar to all the other things, I'm sure you've... Basically that's adrenaline here. Just swap these 3 perk points over to agility and you can use your adrenaline if you want to. I just wanted to mix things up a little bit on this occasion. And that leaves us with legendary perks, and as you can see there's a lot of boring stat improvements here. Agility, luck, intelligence, endurance, and strength. And for once we only have one single perk that increases our passives, and that is extra strength, which, yeah, we have maxed out at 15 strength to begin with, and this just adds 3 more strength for just a bit more carry weight, but ultimately a bit more ultimately a bit more legendary melee attack damage. The rest here just gives us access to extra perk points. And then lastly we do have Ward Rats, really one of my favorite legendary perks, just because it's so unique, it really adds something and it's so convenient. But especially on this occasion, with melee builds you do tend to take a lot of hits and therefore a lot of radiation damage. If you go for a ranged build, you can really avoid radiation damage for quite a lot of situations, but with a melee build it's just a given that you will take red damage, and this gives us extra red resistance, which screws us a little bit in terms of the ghoulish perk, but still 100 radiation resistant make it so you still get quite a good healing when you are in proximity to a fissure site or anything. And in addition to that, you do get healing from it, but also not get the downside of being irradiated, because healing 3 reds per second makes it so you rarely, with the exception of maybe stuff like Radiation Rumble or Nuke Zones, you rarely add up reds to your health bar. So yeah, that's why it's here. And yeah, that was it. I hope you enjoyed it, guys, and yeah, I really enjoyed playing this build. Give it a shot. If for some reason you are as stupid as me and have never considered using Thorn Armor or grinding for it, I can only say I'm not a person that typically likes grinding for stuff, but this has been one of the things I have grinded for and not regretted it in any meaning. Like, for example, the Strangleheart Power Armor, don't get me wrong, it's nice to have, but really looking back at it, I wouldn't have gone through with the grind if I really had used it beforehand. But when it comes to Thorn Armor, this is, in my eyes, one of the best things that could have happened to melee builds, and yeah. So, go for it, and I hope you enjoyed the build, guys, and see you next time. Bye.